Welcome to The Power Within. I am Kristy Hunter, joined by my amazing co-host, Lindsey Knight. Each episode, we bring you inspiring individuals who are igniting their power within and making a real difference in the world with their passion. Tune in and get ready to be empowered and inspired. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Power Within, the podcast. And today we have the amazing Kristi Coreless with us. We met Kristi this last weekend at our Power Within event in Orem, and she was an attendee, and we learned about her amazing story and just had to have her on our show. So we are so grateful that she's joining us today to share with us her inspiration of an amazing life and all of the things that she's experienced and the things she continues to want to share with the world. So Kristi, thank you for coming and welcome.
Thanks, Kristi.
Thank you.
We're so happy to have you.
Thank you so much for inviting me. So, thank you.
We would like to start with, if you could give us just a brief background of what you have worked on in the past and also what you're currently dealing with currently.
Yeah. So I am the mother of 4 amazing children. They came to us in different ways through infertility, adoption, in vitro, and then I was led to natural modalities like foot sewing and natural solutions. So I was able to support my body and have our last one on our own. So that kind of led me into my business, my path with that, and helping others through foot sewing and developing some spiritual gifts over the years. And talking about joy and what brings me the greatest joy, it would always be to just work with my clients and just help them heal or have breakthroughs or start to realize they had connections with those on the other side. Anyways, talk about the mess becomes the message through these different experiences. Had I not had to go through the challenges to get my kids here and different things, I would not be able to have done what I've done with foot sewing. About 9 months ago, I was diagnosed with cancer. I don't know how much you want me to get into that right now, but so the last 9 months have looked a lot different. And so I was actually getting really stir crazy, feeling a little bit better, not being on a certain medication. And I just felt like I needed to get out. And I used to go to a lot of self-development things and networking things, right? And so I saw your event, I think by divine, not coincidence, but ordination or whatever you want to call it. So I saw that and I was like, wow, this sounds exactly like something that I would love to go to. And it was close to my friend, like 15, 20 minutes from her house. So I was like calling her up, hey, do you want to go? And so we ended up at your event and met so many amazing women, you and everybody there. It was just perfect for what I needed. So thank you. Thank you so much.
We are so happy that you came. And it was a very powerful event. The whole thing ended up just leaving me in a better space of what we can do and how we truly do have so much power within us. We share quite a lot in common because I also dealt with a decade of infertility and adopted my oldest son. And so I would love to go into that journey with you. Please tell us a little bit more about that experience and working through that and what you learned from it.
Yeah, for sure. So with our oldest, I'm the youngest of 10. So I have a lot of sisters. So I was like the favorite aunt, everybody having all their kids. And I loved kids so much. And I was excited to be a mom. And my husband was 10 years older than me. And okay, we're not going to wait. We can just start with our family. And about 4 years into the process, we realized it's time to adopt. Anyways, there's a few other things with that, but we just knew. And so we started our paperwork and everything. And I had this friend one day tell me, because she'd experienced the adoption process, and she said, what's happened with me, with each of my kids, you start to know when it gets closer. So I remember sitting in this church meeting and this lady started talking about Christmas time, something to do with Christmas. And I had this feeling go through me that Christmas time, that would be amazing, because Christmases usually were hard actually, because the birth of the baby Jesus. And so you think about babies more, even though it's amazing focus, and that's not what it is, but it would make me think of the babies that I didn't have, my family, seeing all their families. Anyways, it was usually a hard time of year. And so when I got this little thought or impression, I was like, okay, this would be awesome. But then the months, that was probably August, the months started coming and going, and it got to be December. And I started to doubt that thought or that intuition, that impression. I thought maybe it's just wishful thinking. But along the way, I'd gotten thoughts like, just in case it happens fast, do this or get this ready or do this with the room, or we'd buy gifts for the birth parents and stuff at the time. So I'd be prompted. So anyways, I was doing all that, but I started to doubt and get worried. And it was the 20th of December and we got the call. I was actually at the school. My husband called me and I was listening to the kids read usually, but that week being Christmas, I was reading them the Nutcracker. So I remember my sister-in-law actually was like, hey, Tim's on the phone and he needs to talk to you now. And so after I finished the story, I step out into the hall and I'm like, what's up? And he's Tom called and that was our caseworker. And he said, ho, ho, you're getting a baby. And so that day we had to actually go that very day and meet with the birth mom. She was supposed to be induced actually that day, but there's a whole nother side of the story that's phenomenal on how we got her. We just know everything had to connect to get her to us because she was going to actually place with somebody else. And that ended up, the lady was pregnant after, she didn't know. Anyways, but it all worked out to where she got to be with us. But anyways, so we got that call, we met with her. She was born the 23rd and we picked her up literally Christmas Day. So that was that. And I spend a little more time on that story because that I feel set my whole stage, like for all of my life since then. Like I started to realize, do you know what? Trust those thoughts, trust those impressions. My sister, turns out, I didn't know this, but my sister had called my mom because I was telling people, I guess, oh, I think I'm going to get her in December, I think. And here it was coming and going. And so I had this sister that was so concerned that her baby sister, because I don't have just one mom, I have 7 moms because I'm the youngest. And this one sister was so concerned. And she said to my mom, what's going to happen when it comes and goes and she doesn't have her baby? And so I think about how quick are we to look at the what if on the negative side and believe the doubts instead of trust in the what if it's really true on the positive, what we want and think of. And so anyways, that was just like, so it happened. And I'm like, yeah. So I learned to trust. And the whole adoption process, I don't know if you got to write letters or send gifts to your birth parents or family or anything, but we got to, through the agency, send correspondence. And there would be so many times where she would have asked for something and I would have already sent that extra picture about what she wanted or a letter to answer her question. And so I literally saw like God was so involved. He cared so much about that individual birth mom and her. It led to me writing a song. I was not a songwriter. That was like not my thing. Like I hear that you do music and that's your thing, Kristi. But for me, like my extent was poetry. I liked my English classes. I had played the flute in high school and band, but I was not a songwriter. I did inherit a piano. And so while I was waiting for our daughter to come, I thought it'd be fun to take some piano lessons, keep myself busy. But I just happened to have a friend that was doing some recording of her songs in the studio. And I got this thought, because it was so hard, I thought, to tell this birth mom how grateful we were for, you just can't say thank you. Like that's a big, huge deal to give us your child that you, for the first 8.5 months, she was just planning on keeping her anyways. And so it was so hard for her to realize that is what she felt she had to do, even though she didn't want to. She knew that God was telling her she had to do it. So I was able to write this song for the birth mother. But anyways, all these things, I feel like if we get a thought, why not just do it? We don't need to know all the steps. I could have sat there and been like, oh no, how do I write a song? But I just was like, okay, I can go with this thought, this random, maybe not everybody's spontaneous and works that way, but I don't know, for my life, I've just felt go with it and trust those thoughts and impressions. And it's been such a blessing. Yeah, to me, the adoption, we ended up getting our next daughter 3.5 years later through adoption. And then I was prompted to do in vitro. We got our guy through in vitro. And then another really big moment was when he actually had fallen off right here. I'm at my kitchen table right now. Our 3.5-year-old was climbing up to see her brother and she slipped. There was a tablecloth. We never used tablecloths at that age with our kids so little, but for some reason we had guests over before and there was a tablecloth. She slipped on the tablecloth. He falls and hits his head on the tile. And we end up at Primary Children's Hospital. This is before I knew anything about alternative foot zoning or anything. I was at the hospital and I always believe things happen for a reason. And yet here I found myself in this hospital. My little baby had a bleed in his brain and they were doing scans and x-ray after x-ray and scan. And I started to worry about the longer term effects of this 4.5-week-old body with the radiation. And in answer to prayer on what to do with that, I was like, okay, actually, I want to back up because I had this thought in the hospital that I'd always believed things happen for a reason, but in that moment, it was like, what good could possibly come from this? I knew babies were dying or miscarriages or cancer or things, but in my world, I finally, after all these years, get my little guy through in vitro, and he's in the hospital and has the thing. And so, anyways, I had what good could come from this thought. And then after I prayed about, okay, he was fine, we were out of the hospital, is there anything that can get this out of his body? That's when I was led to the foot zoning. I had a neighbor that kept talking about this foot zoning thing with her niece. And if it hadn't been for that fall, that's what led me to the foot zoning. And then not only could I help him and my girls with their adoption trauma and background and all that, but then have that end up being a career. So anyways, all of our experiences with getting our kids here, I feel like they just built one by one into the next and helped me on my journey to understand the bigger picture. And just when you think what good could possibly come from this, it's like endless of all the good that could possibly come from it, right? In our
all of the experiences, right? Because
right.
Life is done for us, not to us.
Exactly.
Every experience we have the opportunity to learn and grow. Yeah. And that shows in each one of those experiences that you just shared, that you can look at them two ways. That's the most interesting part, is anything that happens, we can look at it and be like, that's not fair, I can't believe it. Or we can look at it and be like, look, what can I learn? What's going to happen next? What can I take from this? And my mind is blown at like the parallel lives that we have and things. Like we'll have to talk. That'll be like a whole nother discussion. But yes, and honestly, music is generally, at least for me, I feel like I download most of my songs from heaven. That the words just
exactly. We just get to be the conduit, right?
Those are the best ones, when we are just open to being a vessel of words.
For sure.
And I think that's with poetry, with music, with art, when people are any creative medium, because I think we are all meant to be creators. And when we are in that creative space, we are using God's wisdom. I'm a very spiritual human. We will talk about God on this podcast if you don't know, because I truly believe that is the power within. The power within us is our divine spirit that guides us to who our greatest divine self is, and so we can impact at our greatest level. So that is just so cool. So you have these 4 kids now you're doing foot zoning, which it sounds like it helps with infertility, it helps with trauma, it helps with all kinds of things.
Physical, there was an experience, lots, but there are 2 main ones, that really big physical experiences where they were told they needed back surgeries and they were able to avoid the back surgery. And so combination of foot zoning and some other things on the one, but the other one, we'll go there for a minute. So that'll lead me into my friend. About 12 years ago, I had a friend who was actually dealing with cancer. She was on hospice. It was all throughout her bones. She'd actually found out because she sat down and her pelvis shattered. It was just crazy. So wow. Anyways, I was going to her foot zoning, even though I know at that point it was more for me than her to spend time with her. And she told me, you need to read this book called The Message. And she said, don't worry, because I'm going to be able to do so much more on the other side. And I believe that's my belief system. But at that moment, I was just like, wait a minute, you're like a second mom to me. You're such a good friend. She was a reflexologist, massage therapist, first person I'd ever had massage therapy from. She actually had done something called Touch for Help to balance my organs and glands before I went and had in vitro done. So I felt like that was one of the reasons it was able to take. And then she also ended up at the hospital because she lived around the corner, and we'd taken these health classes at the same time. I introduced her to this lady that taught me so much about staying away from the parabens and all of that. Anyways, that's a whole nother thing about why I left that career with the makeup and skincare. But I just have to say one little thing. If anybody is listening, I always just have to say a little thing. If you don't know, if you are wondering about your infertility or want to prevent cancers, at least the hormone fed kind, you want to be very careful what you're putting onto your skin. I found out with the infertility, I needed to stay away from all the parabens and ethanol. There's a lot of chemicals, but those were the worst ones. And now you see over these years, I don't know if you noticed, but everything is saying paraben free. They've been linked to not only infertility, with that being like a xeno or a chemical estrogen that screams so much louder than your body needs. Anyways, it overwhelms the system and you can have infertility, but then they're finding an intact paraben in the intact parabens unbroken down inside of breast cancer tumor cells. And so as soon as I found out all about this, I stepped away from my business of putting on all these toxic products and I started teaching women. So anyways, so I had introduced this friend, Deanna, to this lady, and she taught all these help classes and she was awesome. So anyways, we had all that same kind of connection. We could talk so much, and she ended up being at my son's birth. So she was a very dear friend. But so it was very hard when she said, don't worry, I will be able to do so much more on the other side. I believed her, but at the same time, I just didn't want her to go. Like, who wants to see their friend go? But that gave me some assurance. And I read the book she talked about by Lance Richardson called The Message. And it talked about this near-death experience where he is on the other side and he sees like his grandfather whisper to his dad, remember, you've got to catch that plane. And so he ends up being able to go catch the plane that he was going to try to reschedule, but was forgetting. Anyways, he gets to be able to get to the hospital and help him come out of a coma. In this case, it was through a priesthood blessing. But anyways, so he was able to share that and other things in this book that talked about when he was on the other side, his cousin is talking to him that had passed away and showing him around, and just the connection. He could go and he could see where his kids were. He was in this coma for 5 or 6 weeks. He could see where his kids were, and he was helping them know he was there. And later, when he came out of the coma, the kids and his wife, there were different experiences with each of them. They could feel his presence and remembered at the exact moment that he remembered. And so anyways, they could feel his presence. He was helping them. He dies 5 years later, doesn't come back. And his book, his wife ends up writing, if you want to read it, get the full story with the wife's experiences after he passes, because he does so much more too. But anyways, so at this point, my friend passes away. I read the book. It gets to be a couple months later, a month or two later, I keep getting this thought to call her daughter. She was at her daughter's home on hospice when she was at the end of her life. And I had talked with her daughter. I did a little foot zoning with her one time because sometimes when hospice wasn't there, she had to flip her mom and help herself. So she had a little bit of a back thing, but I kept getting this thought to call her daughter. And I would just forget. It would get to be too late at the end of the day or too early in the morning. I don't know how long it went on, but it felt like a week or two, and I was feeling so bad. So one night I get the thought again to call her daughter. I'm like, okay, so I have this mental conversation with my friend. I'm like, Deanna, if this is you and your daughter needs my help, I would love to help her. Just please remind me between the hours I'm awake and she's awake. The very next day, I get my zoning binder out because the client's going to come for something, and I'm like checking my notes or something, and I see her name. Tell Deanna about this, because she was into like-minded stuff, and so I wanted to tell her about something, my zoning that I learned. So anyways, I see her name, that jogged my memory. I'm like, oh, okay, thank you. So I call her daughter, and all I could get out was, hi, you've been on my... And she's, oh my gosh, I've been looking for your number. I've been cursing my mom because all while she was alive, I never needed her help. And now that she's gone, the doctors say I need surgery. The chiropractors and other doctors, they've done everything they can. And they say I need back surgery. But I know my mom would roll over in her grave if I did that, because I don't think I really need that. So anyways, I said, come on over. We got together for this foot zoning, and we felt her mom's presence so strong. I knew she was guiding it. We did some foot zoning, some emotional release, just whatever needed to be done. I sent her on her way with a little essential oil to help, but she never had to have the surgery. She was completely fine. So that's when I realized what my friend was saying was so right on. She could definitely help more on the other side. And then that same daughter, she'd actually had 2 or 3 kids and then had adopted one before her mom died. Then she found out about this other boy she was going to get to adopt. And it was like on her mom's birthday or Mother's Day, like her mom's name was all over it. And then fast forward a couple years later, I see her in-laws and I say, oh, how is Joanne doing? Haven't you heard? She's pregnant and she's due on her mom's birthday. So I'm like, okay, I don't know why some people get to have more of those experiences, because some people could be listening and be like, gosh, I don't have that for my child or my spouse or I don't know why, but I think it's really super cool when you can hear or see those stories or open up to the possibility that, yeah, they are helping, and ask, okay, if you're there, could you help me with this specific child that I'm struggling with? Or could you help me know what to do about this? I found that even just being open can help. But yes,
I think that's so true. Those connections to heaven, you do have to want to.
yeah.
Like, you have to be open and be willing. I have a brother who passed away from cancer a few years back, and I have a baby that I lost. And I do believe they're there helping.
Yeah.
And it's having the faith that if you ask, that they will be there to comfort you, and being open to that, and trusting that the veil is thin.
And those experiences with my friend Deanna made me look back and realize, oh, my brother that passed away when I was 4.5 and he was 9. I started to realize at the hardest point before we got our daughter with the adoption, I knew she was coming. I knew she was going to be a girl, and I knew it would be okay. But it was hard. And I had 15-year-old twin neighbor girls pregnant within a week, or no, a month of each other. And I'm just like, we're ready. We're ready. Why are they getting the baby? And so at that moment, and the thing that had sustained me for a long time up until that moment was I kept getting the thought that just because you're ready, and so maybe this will apply to others with different timing with things, or your children, whatever, but sometimes just because we're ready, like that doesn't mean, obviously, like she needed to come to this earth for things to happen in her life on her timeline, not mine. So that had sustained me for a while, that she needs to be here for the exact moments for her in her life. But that day, it was the hardest. I remember thinking of my brother, because I had felt him a little bit, but in that moment I was like, I don't know how it works. And I had another mental conversation with my brother. His name is Lynn. And I said, Lynn, I don't know how it works up there, but if you could put in a good word, if you could pull any strings, I feel like we've wearied the Lord. We've done everything in our power. We've fasted, we've prayed, we've done all the checking the boxes, we've waited. But please, if you can do anything, we would so appreciate it. I kid you not, within a week or two, we got the call. And so my daughter's name is Emily Lynn after him. And with the foot zoning thing, finding out about that after my baby had fallen, and we went to the Premier Children's, and I get in to talk about going to this foot zoner, my niece, or my neighbor that told me about it originally, her niece was about to have her baby, so she couldn't zone my son. So she referred me to somebody. Guess who that was? The person she referred me to happened to taught my brother high school English. And so I got to go and see her, and she would tell me about my brother and these things that I, being 4.5, didn't remember or know my brother like some of my other siblings. But then that was his name written all over it. Like he's saying, Kristi, hey, look how I got you here. Look how, I helped you with Emily. And so it took, I think I noticed it, but it took my friend, I think, passing to really go back and say, look, it's not just her. You've been having people help you in other ways for a long time. So.
And I think, don't you think when we go through things like that and you're in the thick of it, that's how it goes when you're in the thick of it. Is so hard to zoom out and see what's being orchestrated on your behalf. And then after, I think, is where the beauty and the grace comes in, where you can zoom out and recognize how it was all orchestrated for your good. And that's where you guys were saying, like, where the faith comes in, and leading with faith. It's so hard to do when you're in the thick of it, right? It's so hard to choose faith over fear when everything around you is screaming fear. Like, this is terrifying and uncertain, and I don't know how this is going to end. And we as humans don't like to not know the ending. We don't like uncertainty.
For sure.
And so I think that it is one of the greatest mercies that we have, the ability to zoom out like that and have those moments of inspiration of, look what has happened on your behalf for your good. And where you can make all of those connections, like those were all brought to your brain. Like they were all like inspiration that you received to, oh, look, and this is what happened, this is what happened, and this is, because some people may have experienced, it's funny because some people may have experienced the same thing that you experienced and not recognized any of that orchestrating. And I think that's a trap that we often fall into as well, is not recognizing all of those divine inspirations and interventions that happen on our behalf.
For
So
sure.
good for you is my point, for recognizing those things.
I, I couldn't not, like, there's just been so many things I've just been, and that's again one of my greatest joys and the fulfillment I've got, I think, out of my life is to be able to, for so many years, I'm not actively obviously foot zoning right now because of my situation, but for so many years, like my daily job was like I got to have these experiences because I started to develop my intuition after my friend passed and started to realize that I could tune in for others too. And there were messages that their loved ones wanted them to have. And so with different people, just amazing experiences that I'm like, how lucky have I been to get to have that for a job, basically, when a lot of people like don't really love their job or struggle, or but I got to have that almost daily. And so that's where I have so much gratitude for. I just feel like I got to be an instrument. I got to be a vehicle, and I just got to kind of watch, like with the song, with there's a guided meditation and zoning on audio that I ended up getting out, that again I just felt like it was like I picked up the microphone when I was in the studio and the words just came, even though I'd written down a little, but it was just like it wasn't mine. You talked a little bit about Kristi. It those are the best when the downloads just come through you. And so I just consider that like one of my greatest joys and privileges of my life so far, is just being able to have been a part of so many miracles. There was a guy in Kenya. I'd been prompted to homeschool my kids, so I stopped this business, and that was it's been interesting, a pattern of trusting every little thing in my life, however big or hard or whatever. And the first one was hard when I had to give away my skincare makeup business because I had pushed through and earned a car and had all these women that just that relationship. It wasn't just the money and the car, it was the relationships, right? And then I felt, whoa, I can no longer put this on and take this off and say, oh, look, don't you look good? Don't I look good? Now we can have cancer or infertility, right? So I had to be like, no, I've got to walk away from this. I remember standing in my kitchen and being like, I know I've got to do this, but this is going to be hard. And I felt it was a big thing too. I just felt like a closeness, like I felt like there was heavenly help telling me it was going to be okay. And that's how I ended up getting to have my child, because I started to heal my body and get away from those things. But anyways, I had to say goodbye to that business. And then I was having a successful doTERRA business I had built along with my foot zoning. And all of a sudden I felt I needed to homeschool my kids, and I needed to just really pause that and not do any. It wasn't just, oh, maybe a little bit here and there. It was like, no, you're going to focus on your kids. You're going to homeschool. Anyways, and I knew if it was meant to come back, I could rebuild and I could do that and everything. And I actually gave my business to my sister. That's another thing, but I felt prompted to do that because she was possibly going to go through a divorce. And anyway, so I swapped places with her, but I'm getting back to Kenya. Sometimes I get on tangents. So getting back to Kenya. So I had been prompted to homeschool. I was homeschooling my children, and my oldest had anxiety, and I'd been praying about how to help her. And I kept getting this thought, which is not really rational at all, is when your daughter has anxiety, sure, you want to fly them across the world on a trip to Africa. She was like 13 at the time. But I was feeling like she needed a humanitarian trip, especially to Africa. She was half African American, so she could see we're not just living in a white world, and she could see that things are different over there, and maybe she would appreciate some things. Anyways, lots of different reasons, but I kept feeling Africa humanitarian trip. And I was at an event, and they were having us write down our goals and stuff. And so I wrote down, okay, specifically humanitarian trip to Africa with Emily. And then 2 or 3 days later, I'm at this group networking mother-daughter retreat, and all these women were making these great connections. And I just had the thought, oh, I need to ask somebody, does anybody know anybody with connections to humanitarian work, like in Africa? The person next to me pointed across the room, yes, Heather does, and she's leaving in 3 or 4 weeks. I'm like, no way. I was able to expedite my daughter's passport. I already had mine, luckily. I expedited hers. We were on the plane. My daughter just last night reminded me, I paid her $200 to get her to go. I didn't remember that. And a hamster. So not above bribery. Sometimes we don't have to be above bribery. But I gave her a hamster, supposedly. I don't remember. And $200 to go. But it was a few weeks of literal hell, I will just say, because of her anxiety. She was so nervous about going. I did a lot of face zoning because that one really helps with the hormones and mental body and stuff. Anyways, anxiety and depression stuff. But it was hard. But as soon as the plane lifted, she was fine. We were good for the most part. But the crazy thing about that experience is it wasn't just getting her there. Like, I ended up starting a humanitarian nonprofit thing because of it. And she has met, he was 11 at the time and she was 13. He was another boy that went from here on the trip, the Heather that they said, oh, Heather's going. So it ended up being her son. Anyways, they connected and they're going to get married eventually here. He has a year and a half on a mission in Brazil right now for his church, and then he'll come back. But that was the big thing too. Did I know? Was God like saying, oh, go on this trip and she'll meet her future husband, or you'll have this humanitarian work you'll start a nonprofit and help these people in this community that only you could reach. No, I didn't know any of that, but God knew. So sometimes it's like that. You just take that first step, you just act. And that's one of my big things right now is don't procrastinate. I don't have the luxury anymore to procrastinate. Sometimes I would get ideas and I'd put them off and I would put them off. My YouTube channel and podcast that finally I'm like, I cannot put that off any longer. I don't have the luxury. And that's one of the big thing with the power within, which everybody was like, okay, we're going to help you do this. And so I'm grateful for the help of those connections and getting that launched. But anyways, it's like, we don't know. Sometimes we might think, okay, I have this problem, so I'm going to pray and I'm going to get help. It's, oh, cool, this is awesome. But sometimes can you look at your life and see, oh my gosh, that not only led to this, but that. But it's like it forever changes your life if we listen. But that's the thing, having the courage to take the first step, having the courage, even though my husband's, we don't have the money to go to Kenya. I'm like, honey, I just feel it. I have to do this. And he's like, okay. And then you just got to take the first step. Don't procrastinate.
I love that message. That message is so important because we're often given inspiration and sometimes it doesn't make sense. And sometimes it ends up being messy for a while, but like the success in the mess, I think is a really important concept that if we're following our inspiration and we're trying to take those steps forward, as I've seen, sometimes it takes time, but the evolution of that is always so much more remarkable than we could have ever envisioned for ourselves. I wanted to just take a moment. One of the things that happened at Power Within is we did an arrow break. And Kristi was very brave all of us were very brave in doing it. But what touched me is the first thing we had to do during this arrow break was write down our greatest fear. And it was when you shared that the room got really real. I was hoping you would talk about that experience for a second, because it's one of the main reasons we're here today on this podcast.
Yeah, like I said, I need to practice what I preach because, you got to do what you're getting, those thoughts or those impressions, or you have those dreams or desires, like they're there for a reason in your heart. You got to just do them. And sometimes we get afraid just because we might not know what to do. I get this idea to do a YouTube channel and a podcast. I'm not the most technically inclined. And it was really easy over the years with my businesses, with the zoning and the doTERRA help coaching too, and all this stuff. So at that event, I wrote down that my fear was dying before I could reach the people that I feel I'm meant to reach through my podcast and YouTube. And so and I didn't really realize I am not afraid to be on the other side because I know it's going to be amazing, obviously, but I do have fears of what I might have to go through pain-wise, what my kids might have to watch, what the stuff that I wouldn't want, like all that messy stuff. And I still have that optimistic side, like I said, that I believe in miracles if it's God's will. But up until this moment, which is very ironic, everything I felt prompted to do so far hasn't led to healing or my body looking better like I thought. Like I just thought, oh, I'll go to Mexico and do these treatments here, and then I'll be back and I can help people from what I've learned. And after those 3 weeks, I had to do another 8 weeks of something. And then after that, I had to do this and this, and then led to all these things and met a lot of amazing people. But again, it's not the way I would have wanted it. So it came up it got real at the event, because it was like, oh, I now have this fear of dying before I finished getting this podcast and this YouTube channel out there and sharing what God has put in my heart and my life experiences. I know they can help people. I've spoken on some stages up until this point. And right before my diagnosis in August, I actually was starting to go to the National Speaker Association, feeling prompted that I needed to get on stages and do it in a massive way. And then I had this happen, and I'm like, what now? And so anyway, so that was what hit really real, and it made it really emotional. I was like, I know this is an arrow that will just break, and everybody's doing it. It made me think about, I don't know if everybody thought about this, but probably likely, that you start to see, you get afraid of stuff, right? But then you see somebody else is breaking through their thing, that they're being successful with it. So you start to realize, obviously, okay, if they can do it, I can do it. Like you have a podcast, right? Other people have podcasts. If they can do it, I can do it. So the arrow thing was very powerful, with just all these things coming up of not only my fears, but then knowing that, again, I don't have control over what happens on so many levels, but I can control if I say, okay, I will take the first step. And after breaking the arrow, the interesting thing I have to say too is, I think most everybody, theirs broke into 2 pieces. Mine ended up in 4. And right before I took the step forward and it broke, Marianne asked me, who's here with you? Who's here with you? And I said, my brother, my friend Deanna, God. And I took that step forward, and it broke into 4. And you, like, it takes all of you. And so
Wow.
I thought that was another, just a tender mercy.
I have chills.
Yeah, see, and it didn't have to happen that way. Yeah. So you can't make this stuff up. so you can't, it's like those things, you just have that knowing, right? And so I knew. And so on the other part of that, when you have your fears, then you write your why do you know, or how do you know you'll be successful. It was like, because I have heavenly help, because I know people need to hear what I have to say, because with God all things are possible, right? So again, the thing to always remember is it's just as easy, even though we think it's not. And maybe it's not, but it could be. Let's say this, it could be just as easy if we spend our time on that, focusing on why we're going to be successful, instead of that, I don't know, because I might look stupid doing it, or I might fail, or I might not know technology, so it might not be really good quality at first. Like, just do it. Because why? Because this has to be more strong and more powerful. Your why, you got to find a why that's more powerful than your disbelief or your fears, right?
Oh, for sure. That the why that pushes you through those days when it's so hard. And you were able to film your first episode.
Yes. And so after that, here, I think it can't get any better than this. Not only am I able to do that and have that such a breakthrough, and then the beautiful Wendy,
yes, Wendy.
Wendy hands me this gift basket. And that was the funny thing too. Not funny, but I had this thought of this little prayer. I would love to have that, because I know there's some resources in there that I would love to have. But if anybody else in this room needs it more than me, I'd love to, but if anybody else in this room needs it more than me, then that's totally fine. Wendy wins. I'm like, oh, good. She needed it. And she comes and she sets it in front of me. And she said she was praying that if she won it, she would give it to somebody. And she just needed to know that she was heard. So she had her connection answered. I had my connect. Anyways, just amazing. So then after that, like, it just keeps getting better, right? It's the event that keeps on giving. And Jen comes up to me and she's, hey, how serious are you? Are you like willing to, like, could I help you like record your first episode like right now? I was like, sure, why not? Why not? And so the amazing Jen helped me to record it. So I have the first, the introduction of why I'm doing this. And
what is the name of the podcast?
The name is Before I Go. And again, it could be years and years, or it could be sooner, but there's just, I think, things I need to do and say and have people. One of my things I really want to do is have people that have overcome challenges and the lady that her husband was Lance Richardson, that she ended up writing more about their side of the story too. Like, I want to have her on my podcast, and just people with experiences of overcoming challenges and that closeness to the veil and spiritual topics. And anyway, so before I go, that's what it's.
I
So
love that.
we are going to leave links to Before I Go, the YouTube channel podcast, in our description. Also, beautiful Kristi has some like walkthroughs, meditations with both foot zoning and other meditations that are for purchase. We're going to have the links to those in the notes. And please follow her, be in contact with her. Follow us here at Power Within, where we're going to be interviewing different people who've attended our events, as well as talking about ways that we can tap into our own innate power and change the world. You guys, this isn't just about changing ourselves. This is about helping everyone around us, and it's a ripple effect. And that's
Sure.
what I really noticed at this event is I had an idea in January that I needed to do an event. And if I hadn't followed that, we wouldn't be here today.
Exactly.
So, as Kristi says, follow your intuition. Don't procrastinate. Take the steps forward, because you never know whose life you're going to touch and whose podcast is going to be released because of it and who we're going to affect. So, thank you for joining us today. And remember, you have the power within. Bye, everybody.